The road through northern Arizona stretched in a straight, merciless line, cutting through sand and stone like something drawn by a ruler across an empty map. No towns for miles, no cell reception, just heat rising from asphalt in shimmering waves that distorted distance and made everything ahead look fluid and unreal. Daniel and Sophia had argued about taking this route. It was faster, according to the GPS, before the signal dropped, but locals at the last gas station had warned them about weather rolling in from the west. Desert storms don't arrive politely. They erase visibility and bury anything left exposed. Daniel had laughed it off. The sky looked clear enough at the time. Now, 2 hours later, the horizon ahead carried a faint brown smear that hadn't been there before. Sophia noticed it first. A wall, not tall yet, but widening. The wind shifted abruptly, pushing against the side of the car hard enough to make Daniel tighten his grip on the wheel. Sand began skimming low across the road like something alive, thin at first, then thicker. Within minutes, visibility dropped from miles to hundreds of feet. The first real gust hit without warning, slamming into the vehicle broadside. Daniel swore and slowed. The brown wall ahead grew darker, taller, consuming the sky. "We should pull off," Sophia said, voice steady but tighter than before. The next gust made the decision for them. The car engine sputtered once, twice, then lost power entirely. Daniel coasted onto the shoulder just as the wind intensified into a sustained roar. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. Sand hammered the windshield in relentless bursts, visibility collapsing to almost zero. The world outside dissolved into a moving wall of dust. Through the blur, Daniel spotted a structure roughly 50 yards ahead, an old gas station, abandoned by the look of it. Faded signage barely visible through the storm. "We waited out there," he said. Staying in the car risked burial if the engine didn't restart. The wind only grew stronger. They grabbed what they could, water, a flashlight, Sophia's backpack, and stepped into the storm. The force nearly knocked them sideways. Sand stung exposed skin like needles, visibility reduced to silhouettes at best. They leaned into the wind, moving slowly toward the structure, breath shallow behind scarves pulled over their faces. The gas station stood skeletal against the brown sky, windows broken long ago, metal awning groaning under pressure. The front door hung crooked but intact enough to push open. They slipped inside and forced it shut behind them, cutting off the worst of the wind. The interior was dim, dust-coated, long stripped of anything valuable. Old shelving units stood rusted and empty. The smell inside was dry and stale, layered with something else beneath, faint, organic, almost sweet. Daniel brushed sand from his eyes and moved toward the back wall where a small office door stood partially open. "We stay here until it passes," he said. Sophia nodded, still catching her breath. Outside, the storm intensified, metal panels rattling violently. The building trembled but held. For a moment, it felt like refuge. Then Sophia heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound from somewhere near the floor. Not wind, not shifting debris, a faint, dry rattle. Daniel froze mid-step. The sound came again. Short, sharp, close. He lowered the flashlight beam slowly toward the cracked tile near the counter. At first he saw only dust patterns, then movement. Subtle, coiled. The head lifted slightly, triangular and steady, eyes fixed in stillness. A rattlesnake. Large, unmoving, except for the vibrating tail that produced the unmistakable warning. Sophia stepped backward instinctively and heard another rattle behind her. then another from near the office doorway. Daniel's light shifted rapidly now, revealing shape after shape partially concealed beneath broken shelving and fallen signage. Not one snake, several. The storm outside hadn't driven them away. It had driven them inward. And the gas station, abandoned and undisturbed for years, had become a shelter long before Daniel and Sophia forced the door open. The rattling grew layered now, overlapping in uneven rhythm, not attacking, warning, territory claimed. The storm roared outside like static. Inside, the floor itself seemed to breathe. The rattling did not explode into chaos. It layered itself slowly, one vibration answering another, until the entire floor seemed to hum with restrained warning. Daniel held the flashlight steady, forcing his breathing to slow as the beam traced along cracked tile and fallen debris. Every shadow threatened to move. Every dark corner suggested coiled muscle waiting for the wrong step. Sophia stood frozen near the entrance, back pressed against the metal door they had just shut against the storm, as if reopening it would be safer than advancing deeper into a room that was clearly occupied. Outside, the wind roared like distant machinery, sand striking the walls in relentless waves. Inside, the sound was smaller but more intimate, dry scales shifting, tails buzzing in overlapping bursts, not aggressive yet, but increasingly synchronized. "Don't move fast," Daniel said quietly, though his own pulse hammered so loudly he could barely hear himself. The beam caught another shape near the soda refrigerator carcass along the left wall. Thick-bodied, coiled, watching, not retreating. Rattlesnakes conserve energy. They do not chase unless cornered. That knowledge should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because the room was small, and the storm ensured they could not leave without crossing exposed ground in near-zero visibility. Daniel shifted one foot backward carefully and heard the immediate response. 3 distinct rattles flaring at once from different angles. The snakes were mapping vibration. They were responding to pressure changes in the floor. Sophia whispered that they should climb onto something elevated. Daniel scanned the room quickly. Most shelving had collapsed long ago, rusted into unstable piles. The front counter, however, still stood waist-high and intact. Reaching it required crossing 10 feet of tiles scattered with debris and at least 4 visible coils. Daniel angled the flashlight low again. The snakes were not randomly positioned. They were spaced. Each had claimed a pocket of shadow near structural edges, beneath shelving, along baseboards, near door frames. This wasn't coincidence. The gas station had been theirs long before the storm. Another gust hit the building hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. The rattling intensified briefly, then steadied. Sophia took one slow step sideways along the wall, boots scraping lightly across tile. A sharp, violent rattle exploded inches from her heel. She froze mid-motion as a snake struck, not fully extended but fast enough to leave a clear arc through dust where its head had snapped forward. It did not make contact. A warning strike, but closer than either of them had calculated. Daniel's stomach tightened. The room was too dense with them to treat each as isolated. They were occupying overlapping zones. He scanned toward the back office doorway. 2 coils partially visible there, bodies thick and healthy. They hadn't been starving. The faint organic smell in the room made sense now. Shed skins, rodent remains, a habitat undisturbed for seasons. The storm outside howled louder, metal sheeting on the awning bending under sustained force. Sand forced itself through cracks in the window frames in thin streams. They were sealed in. Daniel decided elevation was the only chance. "On my count," he whispered. We moved together. Slow, no stomping. Sophia nodded, eyes wide but focused. He angled the flashlight toward the counterpath, identifying the clearest line between visible coils. 1, 2, 3 slow steps forward. The rattles spiked again, but no strike followed. The snakes held their ground, heads tracking movement but conserving distance. 4 steps. 5. Daniel felt something brush lightly against his boot. Not a bite, just scales sliding across leather. His breath caught involuntarily. He resisted the urge to jerk away. Sudden motion triggers commitment. He shifted weight carefully and continued forward. Sophia followed half a step behind, matching rhythm. When they reached the counter, Daniel vaulted first, landing atop the surface with controlled force. Sophia followed immediately, scrambling up beside him. The rattling surged into a layered storm of its own below them. At least 7 now, clearly visible from above, possibly more hidden behind debris. The counter gave them temporary height, but not immunity. The snakes below repositioned, some sliding partially beneath the structure, others coiling in tighter formations near its base. One began to climb the side slowly, body pressing against rough wood for leverage. Daniel kicked at it instinctively, knocking it back down. It did not retreat far. It recoiled and waited. The office door behind them creaked open slightly under shifting pressure from the storm. The beam swung toward it, revealing additional movement within the darker room beyond. More coils, more dry vibration. The gas station wasn't just shelter. It was layered habitat, front room office storage. They had forced themselves into the center of it. Sophia's voice trembled now as she asked how long desert storms usually lasted. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. The building shuddered again as a particularly strong gust struck the side. A section of ceiling tile collapsed near the entrance, slamming into the floor. The impact triggered multiple defensive strikes at once, heads snapping toward the disturbance, bodies shifting outward in tight arcs. One snake struck upward reflexively toward the counter edge. Its fangs scraped wood inches below Daniel's knee. The reality settled in fully then. They were not surrounded by a single threat. They were inside a pressure chamber, where every vibration recalculated proximity. The storm outside was no longer background noise. It was an amplifier, shaking structure, altering floor pressure, provoking defensive response with every impact. And below them, the rattling no longer sounded like scattered warnings. It sounded like territory refusing displacement. The counter began to feel less like elevation and more like a shrinking island. The snakes below had stopped striking randomly. They were conserving motion again, coiled in layered spirals, heads lifted just enough to track vibration through the wood. Daniel could see it clearly now from above. They weren't chaotic. They were efficient. Each one held a defined pocket of space, overlapping enough to close gaps, but not crowding each other. Territorial, but coordinated by instinct. The storm outside intensified into a sustained roar that made the metal awning scream under pressure. The entire building shuddered violently as a gust hit from a new angle, rattling the door in its frame. That vibration traveled down the counter legs and into the tile. Instantly, the rattling below spiked in volume, dry tails buzzing in rapid bursts. Sophia flinched at the sound and shifted her weight too abruptly. The counter creaked. One of the snakes that had been partially beneath it surged upward with explosive speed. Daniel saw the strike but couldn't intercept it in time. The snake's body snapped forward, fangs burying into Sophia's calf just above the ankle, before recoiling back down in a smooth arc. The entire motion lasted less than a second. Sophia screamed, not long, not theatrical, just a sharp, shocked exhale as her leg buckled. Daniel grabbed her before she toppled off the counter, pulling her fully onto the surface as the snakes below erupted in layered rattles. 2 puncture marks were already swelling, darkening at the edges. Blood welled slowly around them. "Don't move it," Daniel said immediately, voice tight but controlled. Movement spreads venom faster. He knew that much. He also knew the nearest hospital was at least 40 miles away. And they had no working car, no signal, and a sandstorm still burying the road. Sophia's breathing accelerated rapidly. "It burns," she whispered, gripping his arm hard enough to bruise. The venom from a rattlesnake doesn't announce itself dramatically. It infiltrates. Tissue around the bite began to discolor within minutes, swelling spreading outward like ink beneath skin. Daniel ripped a strip from his shirt and wrapped it above the wound. Not a tourniquet tight enough to cut circulation, but firm enough to slow spread. He scanned the room desperately for options. The office, the storage room beyond, perhaps higher shelving. But to move required descent, and descent meant stepping into a shifting field of coiled muscle primed for vibration. The storm delivered another violent ooter against the side wall. A section of ceiling above the back office collapsed fully this time, crashing down in a cascade of debris and dust. The impact triggered chaos below. Multiple snakes struck reflexively toward the disturbance. In that split second of redirected focus, Daniel made the decision. "We move now," he said. He slid off the counter first, landing deliberately on a patch of tile he had memorized as clear. Immediately, 3 rattles flared around him. He kept the flashlight beam low, sweeping fast, identifying the nearest coils. Sophia lowered herself carefully, biting down on a scream as weight hit her injured leg. The venom was already working. Her movement was slower, less stable. Daniel supported her under one arm, angling them toward the back hallway where the office had partially collapsed. The debris there had created uneven elevation, broken beams, fallen drywall. If they could climb that, they might gain safer ground. A snake lunged from beneath the fallen soda cooler. Daniel reacted on instinct, kicking it aside with controlled force. It struck leather, fangs scraping, but not penetrating. Another coiled shape shifted near Sophia's dragging foot. She gasped as it snapped forward again. This time it grazed fabric, but missed skin. The room felt alive now, bodies repositioning in response to every tremor. Daniel moved deliberately, but faster than before, adrenaline overriding fear. They reached the collapsed office threshold and climbed over broken boards and insulation. The higher ground created partial relief. Fewer visible coils, more exposed debris. But not empty. 2 snakes remained near the filing cabinet against the far wall, coiled tightly beneath its rusted base. Daniel scanned for something heavier, something final. His light caught a long metal pry bar half buried in drywall. He grabbed it instantly. The snakes reacted to the vibration of the lift, heads snapping upward. One advanced in a quick, lateral glide across insulation toward Sophia's exposed foot. Daniel swung the pry bar downward with full force, pinning the snake's head to the concrete beneath. The body writhed violently around the metal shaft, coils wrapping and tightening in reflex. He pressed harder until the movement weakened. The second snake lunged toward his thigh. He twisted sideways, bringing the pry bar up and down again in a brutal arc. The impact crushed bone. Silence followed, not full silence, but reduced. The remaining rattles in the front room continued, but none had followed fully into the collapsed office yet. Daniel dragged a heavy desk sideways toward the doorway, pushing it into a makeshift barricade against immediate re-entry. The snakes would not give up territory easily, but elevation and obstruction altered advantage. Sophia slumped against the wall, skin pale, sweat beading across her forehead despite the dry air. The swelling had reached mid-calf now. Her pulse thudded visibly at her neck. "Stay with me," Daniel said, kneeling in front of her, voice steadier than he felt. Outside, the storm reached a new peak, wind screaming so loudly it drowned the interior, rattling for several seconds. The building shook under sustained pressure. Through a crack in the rear wall, Daniel saw something else. Daylight beginning to thin the brown sky. The storm wasn't strengthening anymore. It was peaking. That meant it would break. Soon. But venom doesn't wait for weather. The snakes below resumed movement, slower now, repositioning beneath debris and along the counter again. They were not gone. They were waiting for vibration to resume. Daniel realized the final problem clearly. Surviving the room meant nothing if Sophia couldn't walk out before paralysis or shock set in. The desert had forced them inside. The snakes had claimed the structure. And now time itself had become the most lethal pressure in the building. The storm did not end gently. It broke. The roar outside shifted from sustained violence to uneven gusts, then to long, fading breaths of wind dragging sand across metal. Daniel watched the light change through the crack in the rear wall, brown thinning to pale orange. The worst of it was passing. Inside the collapsed office, the rattling had reduced to scattered pulses from the front room, the snakes settling back into guarded positions after the chaos. They were still there. They would remain there. The territory had not been surrendered, only paused. Sophia's breathing was shallow now, lips pale, sweat cooling rapidly on her skin despite the desert heat beginning to return outside. The swelling had reached her knee. Her voice was weaker when she said she couldn't feel her foot. Daniel knew what that meant. He had slowed the spread, not stopped it. Every minute inside was another minute venom moved through her bloodstream. Waiting for the room to become completely safe was not an option. It would never become safe. He pushed the desk aside slowly and scanned the front room again with the flashlight. Several coils remained near the counter. Others had retreated beneath shelving. They were alert, but conserving energy again. Heads lifted just enough to register vibration. Daniel understood something cold and simple. The snakes would not chase far beyond the structure once outside ground vibration changed. Their aggression was defensive, territorial. The true danger was the crossing. He slung Sophia's arm over his shoulder and lifted her carefully. She tried to help, but her weight sagged unevenly. "We don't run," he said quietly. "We move steady." He stepped over the collapsed drywall first, lowering onto the clearest section of tile he could identify. The nearest snake rattled sharply, head tracking, but did not strike. He adjusted his foot placement millimeter by millimeter, keeping pressure even, avoiding sudden shifts. Sophia bit down on her sleeve to keep from crying out as her injured leg dragged slightly. 2 steps. 3. A snake near the soda cooler coiled tighter, and snapped forward in a warning strike that stopped inches from Daniel's boot. He held still, breath locked in his lungs, until it recoiled. They continued. The path toward the door felt longer than when they had entered, every tile a calculation. The metal door stood crooked but intact. Daniel reached it and pushed slowly. Sand fell inward in small streams as it opened. Bright desert light flooded the room, harsh and unforgiving after the dim interior. The rattling intensified behind them at the sudden change in vibration, but none pursued past the threshold. He stepped outside into blinding clarity. The storm had stripped the sky clean. The road was half buried in drifts, but visible. The air felt sharp and hot again, the wind reduced to residual gusts. Daniel didn't look back at first. He moved them 20 feet from the entrance before lowering Sophia carefully into the shade of the building's exterior wall. Her pulse fluttered under his fingers, fast and unstable. He scanned the horizon. No vehicles, no movement. Just the endless stretch of desert and the faint outline of distant rock formations through clearing air. Their car remained where they had left it, partially dusted, but upright. He carried Sophia in short, controlled bursts toward it, stopping only once when her breathing hitched dangerously. The car door opened with resistance from sand packed into the frame. He laid her across the back seat and turned the ignition again. Silence. Then a cough. Then another. The engine struggled, choked by dust. He tried again, pressing the pedal carefully. The engine finally caught in a rough, uneven idle. Relief did not come. Not yet. The road ahead was unstable, visibility still reduced in pockets where sand hung low. He drove slowly at first, tires slipping slightly over drifts, scanning constantly for obstructions. Sophia's voice was barely audible now. She asked if they were clear. He told her yes. He did not tell her how far they still were from help. Miles stretched long in desert terrain. Twice he thought the engine would die again. Twice it recovered. The nearest highway finally appeared through thinning haze like a line drawn across survival. When he reached the first cell signal, he did not slow. He called emergency services while driving, voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. By the time the ambulance met them along the highway shoulder, Sophia's leg had swollen nearly double its size. Her eyes were half closed, focus drifting. Medics worked fast, efficient, professional. Anti-venom would be hours too late for comfort, but not too late for life. Daniel stood back as they loaded her in, desert wind moving lightly now, calm as if nothing violent had happened. Later, officials would mark the abandoned gas station as hazardous wildlife shelter. They would post warnings. They would board the door. But snakes do not read signs. They occupy space left untouched. They defend vibration with instinct older than roads or engines. Weeks later, when Sophia would wake fully in a hospital bed with partial nerve damage but intact circulation, she would ask Daniel what it sounded like in that building. He would tell her the truth. It didn't sound chaotic. It sounded controlled, layered, like territory, correcting intrusion. The desert does not hunt. It waits. It lets storms drive the unprepared into shelter already claimed. And beneath broken tile and rusted counters, the warning is always given first. The mistake is believing. Warning means mercy.